Hey, what's up everybody? This is Mewth24, and this is episode 4 of my Gundam Experience series. And considering that we are at the end of the Alternate Universe content, that means that today's episode will cover Gundam 00 and the Gundam 00 movie, Awakening of the Trailblazer. I found Gundam 00 to have a very interesting scenario in the sense that it kind of followed a similar pattern to Gundam Wing, where it sort of combined this alternate universe scenario and UC elements, but that it also went in its very own different direction. 00 is the first series to be set in the Anno Domini calendar and implied to be in our own timeline just very far in the future, which is kind of interesting that it sort of removes a lot of the fantastical science fiction elements that you see in the other alternate universe series like G Gundam, Gundam X, and even a little bit of Turn A, as well as some of the more militaristic style stuff you see in the Universal Century series. Certainly there's still some of it there, but it's not quite as prominent. You just have these smaller military groups in these three superpower super factions pop up instead of two forces going at it all the time. The first season of 00 was also host to some of my favorite lead mobile suit designs, and while the second season sort of carried on the same style of having 4 mobile suits in 4 different colors, I didn't like the designs quite as much. I thought the Dynamis, the Exia were really cool. The 00 was alright. I definitely like that design, but I didn't like the Cerave quite as much as the Virtue. And I thought it was interesting how they paced the lead characters as well, because with Wing, my biggest complaint was that you had too many lead characters and not enough of them being developed at the same pace or to the same degree, whereas with 00 they take 2 seasons to develop these characters, and some of them are presented as straightforward, and other ones they take their time to cover them. So in the case of Alleluia, a lot of his story is actually covered in the first season, with him being sort of this experiment child and having 2 personalities. Meanwhile, Lock-Ons is presented through 2 versions of the character carrying that same title, being Neil and Lyle. And the first Lock-On, we get him straightforward in Season 1, whereas the second Lock-On sort of does this compare and contrast routine, where it's a different character with the same name looking back, and other people sort of comparing him to what his brother previously did and how he behaved. Then, of course, Setsuna being the lead character of the bunch, sort of the Amuro equivalent for the 00 series, his story takes the longest to come to its full development, and that's because we see who he is basically as a character in the first season, but then the second season brings in the question of the Innovators and the Innovades and how that plays out for Setsuna. Also, I found Tierio to be a very interesting case because we really don't know that much about him until the second season. There's little hints of who he is and how he operates throughout the first season, but he really doesn't open up to the rest of the characters or to us as viewers until the second season, which I thought was sort of a risky approach for them to take, but I think it played out pretty well, and he even ends up being a relatively important character for the movie. If there is one notable misstep for the 00 series, it's that some of the side characters and supporting cast members don't really resonate all that well compared to the lead characters. I found that during the first season there are certain characters that are only in the first season, and that when they are finally written out of the story I didn't care that much about them because I hadn't had that much time to let them grow on me or for them to develop, and that's because I spend so much time on the lead characters and other supporting characters. Now, the supporting characters who are there from the start to the finish, the first season through the second season and even into the movie, they're some of the best supporting characters, I think, in the whole series, as well as some really great supporting characters just overall for the whole alternate universe set of the franchise. But it's just one of those things where, even though it might not seem like it has a huge impact on the series as a whole, it really does kind of detract from you caring about those side characters and the whole Celestial being group, as opposed to just the lead pilots. Now, of course, anytime there's a second season of a show, you always run the risk of running into too much familiar territory again, or treading too far from the original content. And with the second season of 00, I think they did a good job of balancing the two. There's enough familiar faces around, and enough continuations of storylines that they had already set forth in Season 1 that never really got wrapped up by the end of that first season, but there's enough new stuff there that it definitely feels like this is a fresh second chapter of the 00 series. That said, I don't feel like the second season was quite as strong as the first, simply because the Innovators and the Innovades were more deeply rooted in science fiction lore than the whole conflict of the different factions from the first season. But I still think it was a decent follow-up. It felt like it was quite inspired, like it was well done, like they had planned everything out intelligently, and that it was a good way to wrap up the storyline that had been set out since the first season. I'm afraid I don't have a model of the 00 Quanta to represent Awakening of the Trailblazer, so I'm just going to be using the 00 Gundam and the O-Riser. But Gundam 00 Awakening of the Trailblazer kind of delved into new territory, not just for the 00 series, but also for the franchise as a whole. We finally saw some alien life forms, and they were in the form of these ELS things, in the sense they were not sentient life, they were something different, and it was just a really weird, interesting direction for the series that didn't exactly pan out in the way some people had expected. Awakening of the Trailblazer is one of those weird cases where we were kind of promised one thing but got another. It was sort of meant to be a sequel of sorts to the Gundam 00 series, and expand upon the ideas that were brought up in the second season more so than the first, with the whole Innovators versus Innovades. But what we got was actually very much a self-contained story for the large part. Yes, there were elements of the Innovators and the Innovades, and there were story arcs from characters that had been in both seasons of the show, but they were just kind of there for fun. It wasn't really a whole lot of focus on the Innovators and the Innovades as much as it was on the ELS and how Setsuna was going to interact with them. And to that end, I thought it was interesting but very strange and kind of out of place, not just for Gundam as a whole, but for the 00 series as well. Now, if there's one thing I really did love in 00 Awakening of the Trailblazer, it was the mobile suit design, specifically the lead mobile suit designs. With Season 2 of Gundam 00, I wasn't real hot on the redesigns of the mobile suits. I mean, technically they were successor mobile suits, but it was more or less that they were taking what the designs in the first season looked like and reworking them and giving them new abilities and stuff. And the Karadim didn't really do anything for me. The Cerave was okay. 00 Riser I really liked, but the rest of them were just kind of decent at best, I felt. So when the movie came along, it did some more adventurous stuff. The Raphael, I think, is one of the coolest designs in the film. The 00 Quanta, well, it's kind of weird and not symmetrical, is interesting at least, and all the abilities that it has are really cool. And the fact that it's very much like the Stargazer in the sense that it's not designed specifically for combat was an interesting idea. Now, 00 Awakening the Trailblazer is different from the series in its storytelling in the sense that it is very much about Setsuna. Yes, the other characters are there, but this is very much his story. And I think it worked for the sake of it being like an hour-and-a-half film or an hour and 45 minutes or however long it lasted, but it felt like it was very much removed from the formula of the series because you didn't have as much time spent on the other characters. And because there's so much in the way of content that removes Awakening of the Trailblazer from the typical Gundam 00 formula and even the Gundam formula in general, it just felt very odd and kind of clunky, to be honest, and it was weird because it didn't feel like a Gundam film, and in a bad way, I felt. Whereas Turn A Gundam was trying to break so many conventions and trying to be this very adventurous, high-spirited series, and it broke all of the Gundam formula and didn't feel like a Gundam series in a good way, this one feels like it's trying to be Gundam, but just the combination of alien life and the change in the character focus, and there's just so much going on here that just doesn't feel quite right. I mean, there's always been that theme of conservation in the UC series, but it was never quite as preachy or direct as it is in Awakening of the Trailblazer. And that's the thing about Awakening of the Trailblazer that I just find really bizarre, is that it wants to go forth in this bold new territory, to go where no Gundam series has ever gone before, with aliens and all that, but it doesn't want to go too far or too fast. It's like it's afraid to do something too different, but at the same time wants to be just enough different from the 00 series and any other Gundam series that preceded it that, I don't know, it's this weird hesitation that the film has. It doesn't want to be too far removed from the familiar, and I think that's actually its biggest weakness. Personally, I would have rather seen the film throw caution to the wind and just go headstrong into new territory, instead of, for lack of a better word, being half-assed because it couldn't decide what it wanted to be or where it wanted to go with the story. Anyways, everybody, that wraps up episode 4 of my Gundam Experience series, and by association, wraps up the entirety of my Alternate Universe Gundam Experience series. I will be doing the Universal Century side of things in the near future, and with that I'm going to be taking a little bit different approach. Instead of going by the order the series were released, I'm going to be going by the order that I watched the series, and that's largely due to the fact that I still haven't watched the entirety of the original Mobile Suit Gundam, Double Zeta Gundam, and I have yet to finish Victory Gundam. And so instead I'm just going to go by the order that I watched them, starting with 8th MS Team, and just kind of fill them in from there in the order that I enjoyed them and thought they were weakest to strongest. So that's pretty much it for this video. Keep an eye out for the Universal Century side of things, and with that, I will see you guys next time.